Okay, so in this video, we are discussing how to make sure that the sponsor for an adjustment of status or for, in essence, for immigrant visa or green card makes enough. And the sponsor is typically either a petitioner or a joint sponsor. We'll just make it easy. We'll discuss the petitioner. So in essence, what you do is first and foremost is you see what are the Health and Human Services poverty guidelines for the affidavit of support. The affidavit of support is Form I-864. And then what you do is you go to uscis.gov/I-864P. And this is where you're able to see what the current poverty guidelines is. They change every year. And so what you look at is, well, these are the 100% of the poverty guidelines. So these are typically for U.S. Armed Forces folks. And the 125 is what will be for most people. And so what needs to happen is it's dependent on the size of your household. And so if you're the petitioner, then let's say if it's a couple and the petitioner is a U.S. citizen and the spouse is the foreign immigrant that you are sponsoring, well, then that would just be a household size of 2. So it would be 22,887. Now, on the side of a joint sponsor is typically someone external to the family. And so since they're in a separate household, what you would do is to calculate the household size is you would look at however many people the joint sponsor has in their family. Like, for example, if you have a cousin sponsoring you and they are married with a child, they already have a family of 3 of their own, but one is added to that family size to determine the full household size, because now the foreign national beneficiary is added as a household member. And so when you look at the sponsor's household size, you'd look at, let's say in this case, in the example, it was 3 people, but you add 1 because of the foreign immigrants. So then they would need to be making 34,687. Okay, so that is how it is typically determined, and this is for most standard either joint sponsors or petitioners. Now, how to determine, or what are the documents that you look at if a petitioner or for a petitioner or a joint sponsor to determine whether they make that money. So number one place is you look at the W-2 if they're employed. It's typically nicer if they're employed because it's easier to prove things. And so you look at their last year's W-2. W-2s, you typically get them by the 31st of January. And so you look to see what the total number on that W-2 is. In addition to that, you may be able to, depending on how they file taxes, especially if they file taxes on their own, you may be able to look at the total income that they make. And so if you don't have a W-2, but for example, you have taxes of the last 3 years and that amount has been higher, you may be able to prove it that way. Another way to look at proving what the individual income would be is to get a letter of verification of employment from the employer, and then that has to have the name of the employee, the name of the employer, the fact that they're engaged in employment. So as we said, to prove sponsorship for the I-864, the following documents are helpful. We said the W-2, making over the poverty guidelines, a verification of employment is very helpful. The other thing that helps is if you provide the last month in pay stubs, or if you want to go the extra mile, you can provide 2 months worth of pay stubs. In addition to that, you have to prove that the sponsor, and that is whether it's the petitioner or the joint sponsor, they have to be domiciled in the U.S., and you can do that through a driver's license. And lastly, you need proof that they're at least a green card holder or a U.S. citizen, and you can do that through their green card or citizenship. And these are some of the things that are needed to prove sponsorship.